Chapter 9. The Battle of Legann. Under the cover of dragon spells in the night, Dane watched as Queen Theod of Tortal landed her army on a beach a day's march north of Port Legann. All around the girl, men, riders, knights, mounts, and immortals waded onto the sand as carefully and quietly as they could. The two dragons, as well as centaurs and ogres, towed the ship's longboats. These were packed to the rim with arms and supplies, first to be emptied on the land, then to be sent back for more. In the morning, the relief force would try to cut through a dense forest that lay between this beach and the enemy's main camp. Their task would be easier than it had been for enemies of Tortal. It seemed that Wingstar knew spells that would hide and silence their passage. Ozorn and his commanders thought they were safe from attack on their rear, knowing the forest was nearly impassable, and having mages experienced at the detection of other mages' spells. The dragons had been quick to assure the queen that no mortal or immortal could sense their power. Remembering old tales of dragons who walked through cities unnoticed while shrouded in their magic, Theod had accepted their offer of help. Dane sighed. She would not be with the army. She was to act as courier between Theod's force and Port Legann, with Diamond Flame himself to take her back and forth. In a pack she carried things that the king and Lord Imra of Legann should find helpful: bespelled mirrors for use in communicating with the queen and her generals, maps of the plan of attack both for the queen's land army and for the Yemeni ships, and descriptions of the extremely varied collection of folk who would be fighting on Tortal's side. Someone tapped her shoulder. Turning, Dane found Queen Theod. Co-ruler of Tortal, she was dressed in the simple rider uniform and wore her crow's-wing black hair tightly braided. Only the helmet tucked under her arm bore any royal insignia, a small gold crown set over the visor. She also carried a soft leather bag, which she offered to Dane. Taking it, the girl realized that it held something heavy that was the size of her palm. "If you would give this to my lord, I would appreciate it," Queen Theod told Dane. "And tell him that I said the next time he goes on a long tour of our embattled cities, he had better take the Dominion Jewel with him. I don't know how to wield the dratted thing." "You know he hates to use it." Harelt of Ali, chief of the mages in Tortal's Royal University, came over, rubbing his hands against the chill. "He thinks it's a crutch. He doesn't want to be too dependent on it." "With a relief force coming here from the Copper Isles, we need all the help we can get," Theod said flatly. She kissed the girl's cheek. "Good luck," she whispered, and went to the longboat that awaited her, Harelt close behind. Leaning over the rail, Dane waved to the Badger God and Goldstreak, who had been in the boat when they lowered it from the ship. Her reunion with them had lasted only half a day. They would stay with the queen and her generals, sending messages to the commanders through the Darkings who had spied on them until recently. Dane turned Theod's leather pouch over in her hands. She'd heard tales that with his jewel, King Jonathan could ask the very plants and stones to rise up in defense of the realm. "I'll believe it when I see it," she muttered. Tying the long drawstrings around her neck, she stuffed the pouch inside her shirt, to hang next to the badger's claw. Leaning on the rail, she squinted at the shore. She wanted to get moving. "Fretting about your stork man?" Rakosh inquired, lighting on the rail beside her. He dug steel talons into the wood. "He'll be fine. Mages always are." "I'd feel better about that if I could be here to look after him." "Then stay." "I can't," Dane replied, shaking her head. "I don't want Kitten there without me when the big noise starts. In the Dragonlands, I saw... She's just a baby still. She ought to be in a safe place. Since she isn't, I need to be with her as much as I can." "You're breaking my heart," drawled the immortal. "Got a bit of sand in your crop?" she demanded irritably. "A swallow or two of oil should wash it right out of the end that does your thinking for you." To her surprise, he laughed. Around them, she saw gold-skinned Yemenis and Tortalans make the sign against evil. "I deserved that. Don't mind me." He fell silent again, flexing his talons, digging chips of brightly colored enamel from the rail. All the Yemeni ship rails looked tattered after 2 days of storming company. "Barza and Hebek said to wish you happy hunting," he said abruptly. "And if they get Ozorn first, they'll save you a piece." He grinned, showing all of his pointed steel teeth. "Perhaps it's treasonous of me, but I really think I would like to reach Ozorn ahead of them. If I do, they may take all the leftovers from me. How about if I just tell him you said goodbye before I rip him apart?" "That's very thoughtful of you," Dane told him solemnly, her eyes dancing with laughter. "I appreciate that." Rakosh looked up at her, green eyes black in the lamplight. "I think, if I'm careful, I can at least keep one of his braids for you. I'll try, anyway." He tossed his long blonde hair, making the bones that were braided into it click. Souvenirs are always important. His tone changed to one of mockery. God's help us, it's the Stork Man. Come to make sure I'm not corrupting you. Has your grand conference ended, Longshanks? Numer joined them. It has. There go Barza and Hebeck now. He pointed to the silvery shapes flapping their way to shore. The rest of the Stone Tree Nation was there already, perched on the limbs of trees that edged the forest. And I must follow, like a good servant, Rakosh commented. I'll see you both when the dust settles in 2 days. He took off, gliding over the water. At the last second he swerved to avoid a collision with the back of Wingstar's neck. The dragon whirled and lunged, jaws snapping. The Stormwing rolled, inches from her muzzle, flipped up his tail, and sped on. Numer put an arm around Dane's shoulders. It's time, he said quietly. Come with me, she whispered, turning to grab a fistful of his shirt. Jelly squeaked at her. Well, if you wouldn't hide in his clothes all the time, she snapped. Magelet, I can't. Numer caressed her face, eyes intent on hers. No one else can take on Adar Hedensra, not without risking lives needlessly. He could have been a black-robed mage like me, but he thought the university was too confining. He's in the main camp for certain. I can sense him even at this distance. I must be there when Theod attacks. You get into so much trouble without me to look after you, she whispered. He kissed her forehead. You belong in Legann. Make sure that Jonathan understands what Ganiel told us. It's not the kind of thing we can trust to a letter or speech spell. He's got to see that it's vital to capture or kill Wassey's pawn, Valmer of the Copper Isles. Diamond Flame says he'll get Danao of the Copper Isles when his fleet reaches Legann. He sighed, staring into the dark with troubled eyes. And we'll just have to hope she is drawing on those two, or Hanar Hedensra, or Ozorn, not one of the other immortals that were in our dream, because we have no way to identify them. Dane threw her arms around the man's neck. They kissed with hunger and desperation, holding each other tight. Jelly shrilled in protest. They ignored the Darking. Slowly, at last, she opened her arms, and Numer let her slide to the deck. I love you, he whispered. If you get yourself killed, I will never forgive you. That got a laugh from her, albeit a wet one. Numer offered his handkerchief. You'll need it, she said, and wiped her eyes on her sleeve. Something else. Reaching into his shirt, he pulled Jelly out. We talked about this, he told the Darking firmly. You'll be much better off with Dane and Leaf. The Darking stretched its neck long until it could rub its head against his cheek, then retracted until it was a small blob once more. Dane turned. The mage tucked the Darking into the compartment of the pack where Leaf already waited. If these touching farewells are done with... Diamond Flame hovered effortlessly beside the ship. They hadn't even heard his approach. We too must be on our way. Dane and Numer exchanged a last swift kiss before the girl climbed onto the rail. Numer steadied her until Diamond Flame's magic hands picked her up and deposited her on his back. They began to rise. Dane looked at Numer and blew him a kiss, trying to ignore an inner voice that said she would probably never see him again. Light sparkled at the corner of her eye, a speaking spell. Phantom lips touched her cheek, and his voice whispered in her ear, Goddess bless, my darling. 2 days later, in the hour before sunrise, the girl stood on Legann's North Gate watchtower. She knew what lay in the shadows below. Yesterday, as the Queen's army advanced, she had mapped battlefields and camps, riding on Diamond Flame's back, with his magic to keep them invisible. Copies of her maps went both to the city's defenders and to Theod, borne by Wingstar. Now the Tortollan rulers knew their opponent's every position. The Queen and her forces waited at the forest's edge. It was nearly time to ford the river between them and their enemies, time to begin the day's grim work. The image of the land before her was etched into her brain. A swath of torn-up ground, hundreds of yards wide, lay before Legann's outer wall, littered with bodies that had begun to swell, blacken, and stink in the summer heat. With them lay abandoned weapons, shattered spears, arrows, and pikes, stones from Legann's catapults, and wide scorched gouges where the mages had battled. Farther back, out of catapult range, Ozorn's allies had set their defenses. The first of these was a row of logs roped together in X's, their outer ends sharpened to gut any horse that tried to leap over them. Next came lines of trenches, designed to break the legs of horses and men that managed to get through the log fence, and to shelter the enemy's soldiers when arrows were flying. The third barrier was a low, rounded earthen wall. Behind that lay the main enemy camp itself, in a low valley with a river cutting through. She'd mapped the positions of everything out there. As the light improved, she saw the shadowy forms of sentries on top of the low earth wall, just as she could see the tall wooden towers that the enemy used as lookout posts. If the defenders ever let those towers get close enough, they would also give Osborne's allies a way to reach the top of Legann's curtain wall. Shivering, the girl drew the blanket that, with the badger's claw, was her only covering, even closer. Beside her, Dominion Jewel in one hand, a speech and vision spelled mirror in the other, was King Jonathan. With the mirror, he was in contact with his queen. His generals had such mirrors too, to pass news to him more quickly than runners could. "Are you sure you ought to be here?" Onawa, Dane's first Tortollan friend, asked the king. She had come to Legann while Numer and Dane were in the Divine Realms, and had reserved the right to stick to the king's side. "It's foolish to stick yourself out in the open. If one lucky Stormwing slashes you, I'm left to tell Theot why I let you do this." "I distrust any advice that contains the words ought or should," he replied coolly, "and I can't wield the Dominion Jewel from inside, Onawa. I have to see where I use it." Dane leaned forward and mouthed, "I told you so," to Onawa. The Khmer smiled, wry. She hadn't really expected Jonathan to take her advice. Kitten chirped to Dane. The girl awkwardly stooped, clutching her blanket, and used one arm to lift the dragonette into a rectangular notch in the wall. The sky over the hills in the east had gone pink. In the wide, flat space inside the wall behind the king, light bent as diamond flamed move. The tower guards couldn't see him, but they felt him, and walked, when they had to, pressed against the wall. The dragon's invisibility was less of a problem for his allies than visibility. Not only did it keep him from the notice of the enemy's spies, but the few times that he had appeared, there had been panic in the city. Hearing the clank of armor, Dane looked around. Lord Imra, ruler of the faith of Legann, had reached the tower roof. He was no more able to see the dragon than his men, but he knew Diamond Flame was there, and at least he did not press against the wall and sidle along. He walked as if he would normally follow the edge of the circular deck, rather than cut straight across it. Dane, with her hands on Kitten, could see that Diamond Flame moved his tail out of the nobleman's way. The girl made room so that Imra could stand next to the king. The lord nodded his thanks. At first she had not liked this bald, large-bellied man. With his pale eyes and pockmarked face, he looked cruel. The night before, at supper with Jonathan and his leaders, though, she had caught Legann's master feeding Leaf, Jelly, and the Legann darkings under the table. "Well, they look like shadows of their former selves," he'd said then, and winked. Now he smoothed his salt and pepper mustache. "Almost time, isn't it?" "We'll get the Queen's signal at any moment," Jonathan murmured, watching the view to the north. Shadows and light began to mark the landscape, outlining structures and the dead. "I hope these Yamanis can handle those ships blockading my harbor," Imra said to no one in particular. "They seem pretty confident they can handle them and that fleet from the Copper Isles." "It will not be Yamanis alone," Diamond Flame said, mind voice crisp. "Do you but handle your side of this mess. Leave ship warriors to those who can best handle them." "I think your daughter Flamewing believed she could handle ship things too," Dane said, shivering, "and they handled her instead." She smiled briefly at Taka, who had come to join them. "She was barely more than a kit," the invisible dragon said kindly. "You will see. It is rare for adult dragons to be caught." The sun's rim crested the eastern hill. To the north, beyond the enemy's defenses, light sparked. Kitten chirped. "Wingstar is in flight," Taka said. Like Dane, he rested a paw on Kitten, or neither of them could have seen a thing. Dragons, apparently, could not hide from one another, and those close enough to a dragon to touch it would see what the dragon saw. Imra scratched his bald crown. Jonathan drew a deep breath. Dane watched that spark as it rose and grew bigger. Before Wingstar reached the agreed-upon position, the girl silently called out to her friends among the people. The enemy had gotten careless in the time that she was away. Osborne must have told his allies that she had gone. They had resumed tethering their mounts with rope and leather, and leaving them unwatched. Now that Osborne had no Darkings to supply him with information, they had all gone over to the Badger and Goldstreak. He didn't know that Dane was back. Steadying the enemy's horses and mules, Dane warned them again of the fright to come. The mounts shifted at her request, stretching their tethers to the limit. High above the enemy's main camp, placed so that she could also be seen from Legann's walls, the dragon shed the spells that kept her invisible. Stretching out her long neck, she gave a feral shriek that brought sweat to the face of everyone who heard it. Pearl gray scales blazed silver. Gold scales flared with a brilliance that was the essence of light. Wingstar was a living beacon over the enemy tents. Even with Dane's warnings, the mounts were terrified. They reared and lunged, and each rope and strap, carefully gnawed on in the dark by sharp-toothed rodents, snapped. In a thunder of hooves, mules, ponies, and horses fled as the soldiers jumped out of the way. On the wall, Kitten replied to Wingstar with a trill that made Dane's ears hurt. The crenellated granite walls of Legann had been capped with pale gray stones. These now shimmered and glowed, throwing off light but no heart. "She is so much more advanced than our young at home," remarked Diamond Flame as he rose onto his hindquarters. "Perhaps more of them should spend time here." He launched himself, giant wings pulling him aloft. Dane, Kitten, and Taka followed his flight. The other two-leggers were staggering in his backdraft, trying to recover their balance. "I wish we had a sign that this flaming dragon was part of an attack or something," Imra grumbled. "Those dung heaps might think it's one of their own monsters enjoying the sunrise." Diamond Flame reached the sky over Legann Harbor before he shed his cloaking spells. Before him lay the ships of the invading fleet, balked by the harbor's defenders and the chain across its mouth. Dane couldn't begin to imagine how the enemy, or even Legann's friends, felt at the sight of 80 feet of dragon overhead. Diamond Flame snarled. Sails burst into flame. Wingstar too snarled. The sharpened logs in front of the trenches and the wooden towers behind the enemy's earth wall began to burn. "Is that enough sign of an attack for you, my lord?" the king asked. Imra of Legann was a deliberate man. He walked over to get a better view of the harbor and its blockaders. The sailors were scrambling to douse their flaming ships as first Diamond Flame, then Wingstar, descended on them, howling with fury. Legann's master returned to Jonathan's side. "It'll do," he said, reseating his helmet on his armored hip. With a half-bow to the king, he began the climb from the watchtower to the ground. Onawa checked the fit of her arm guards and archer's gloves, and strung her bow. Dane shifted nervously. She hated waiting for an enemy to come at her. "You stay right there and don't move," she warned the pale blue dragonette. "If you tumble out, your granddad will cook me. Once he and your grandma finish with the enemy's ships, anyway." Kitten chuckled and rubbed her muzzle against the girl's face. Leaf, who was coiled around Dane's neck, squeaked a protest. Her mind filled with a metallic roar, a shrill hum, and a rattling buzz. Damping her magical hearing as far as she dared, she told her companions, "They're coming." The Khmer leaned out of the notch in front of the wall and waved her bow. From the wall below the tower, a familiar voice boomed, "That's the signal, lambkins! String your bows! Wake up, Master Woolley! Stormings don't wait till you've finished your beauty sleep." The hectoring voice faded as Sarge, the ex-slave who helped to train the Queen's riders, and who fought with them, urged Legann's archers to prepare for the assault. Dane, stretching the cramped muscles of her neck, smiled at the familiar roar that had woken her on so many days in the rider barracks. She sent a prayer to the goddess to shield him in his charges. Half of the archers on Legann's walls were as young or younger than she was, teenagers chosen for their precise eye and ability to hit what they shot at. They needed prayer. Winged legions rose from the second enemy camp to the northeast. Sunlight blazed from stormwing feathers and glinted on the silver bones of Hurok wings and claws. With them flew winged apes armed with lances or axes. At least there were no wyverns. Diamond Flame had already told the king that they had sensed the arrival of mature dragons and fled. Though they had been willing to fight on with only a single, very young dragon to oppose them, they dared not try to challenge her grandparents. "An ugly-looking crew, aren't they?" Mariel, Imra's lady, joined them, recurved bow in hand, as the immortals came on. A tiny woman, she had lively brown eyes and kept her dark hair cropped short and close. She wore a leather jerkin studded with metal rings over a kilted-up dress. There were archer's gloves on her hands. Unhooking a spyglass from her belt, she surveyed the winged attackers. "You know, these look like they're running from something." "They are," King Jonathan replied. "While Her Majesty's main force attacked in the northwest, her second force hit the camp in the northeast." "What kind of force?" Mariel wanted to know. "The Badger God," replied Onawa. "Stormwing friends," piped Leaf. Jelly nodded. Mariel raised her eyebrows. "If you say so, little ones," she said wryly. "Strange friends that we get in wartime." Another darking stretched to put its eyeless head over Jonathan's shoulder. It was tucked into the king's belt purse. "Centaurs," it squeaked to Mariel. 44. "Very true, Inkblot," Jonathan told Osborne's one-time spy, now his companion in connection to the other Darkings. "Don't forget Sir Raoul, the Knight Commander of the King's Own. He mustered 100-odd ogres as well as the centaurs. Those who chose to live with our laws are fighting for them." The noblewoman laughed. "Do you know, sire, I think that if we live to tell our grandchildren about this war, they will accuse us of making it up." Dane traded places with Taka, putting him at the king's side and herself in front of a stone notch in the wall. Far below she heard the grind of chains and wood. The portcullises on the north, east, and south gates were being raised, the drawbridges lowered. Imral led mounted knights and men-at-arms from the north gate to confront the soldiers who fled the queen's forces. Another company of mixed horsemen, foot soldiers, and archers was leaving by the east gate, Dane knew, and 2 rider groups were trotting their ponies out of the southern gate. If it worked, Osborne's allies on land would be caught between the Queen's relief force and Legann's defenders, just as his sea-going allies, the blockaders, would be pinched between the arriving ships and the harbor's defenders. "Where is Slaughter?" Dane wondered. "She'll have plenty of work today." The noise level rose, fueled by the howls of winged immortals and the roar of enemy soldiers as they topped the rise between their camp and its outer defenses. Seeing the wooden towers that Wingstar had flamed blazing in front of them, some tried to turn back. Roots, belonging to trees long cut down to clear the battlefield, shot out of bare ground and twined around the ankles of the enemy. More runaways dodged the roots, only to meet Imra and his knights. From the valley where the enemy had camped, magic fires erupted and died as Tortle and mages attacked those serving the invaders. The king was pale and gleaming with perspiration. Mariel and Onawa also began to sweat as fear, Stormwing war terror, billowed ahead of the oncoming immortals. No one moved. It affected Dane as it did the others, but all of them had fought under the pressure of that fear before. The choice was fight or die. "How many Stormwings did you say followed Osborne?" Jonathan asked, his normally even voice strained. 248, Your Majesty, if this is all of them coming at us now. The archers on wall and tower swung their bows up, choosing targets from among the oncoming immortals. Dane's was a winged ape that flew with others of his kind, ahead of the Stormwings. He carried double-headed axes and feet that were as nimble as hands. Taking a deep breath, the girl closed her eyes and thought of merlins, vast birds of prey, able to maneuver well in the air. The blanket dropped to the stone deck. Taka pulled its folds back, allowing her to take flight. The air below filled with the snap of bowstrings and the whistle of arrows and bolts. Dane shot straight at the axe-bearing ape, striking him as the Hurok had struck her on the first bridge, dragging her claws across his brow and scalp. He shrieked and grabbed for her as blood streamed into his eyes. Turning fast, she tore at his wings, ripping holes in them with talons and beak. He fell, dropping both axes as he tried to spin around in midair. When she saw a peaked tower roof loom up underneath, she released her prey. He struck the tower back first and rolled limply into the city street below. Swerving fast, she returned to the watchtower roof and the king. A Hurok was her next target. Once more she went for eyes first, then wings. Blinded and crippled, the immortal careened into a Stormwing, dragging it down and into the curtain wall as the Stormwing's feathers cut it to pieces. Dane glided back to a place next to the king, watching for a new target. The archers on the wall shot as rapidly as they could, choosing ape, Hurok, and Stormwing targets with deadly accuracy as they fought Stormwing terror. The king, examining battles on the land and in the air before him, continued to talk calmly into his spelled mirror, relaying what he saw to the queen. In his left hand the Dominion jewel glowed, violet light streaming from its many facets. Jonathan quietly said, "Excuse me," into his mirror and put it on the stone. Raising the jewel, he aimed it not at the oncoming storm-wings, but at 3 Hurrocks bearing riders to the lower wall and the archers there. The riders were human mages. They lashed the fighters on the curtain wall, burning 2 of them alive. White threads of fire drifted from the jewel, falling gracefully onto the Hurrocks and their burdens. Kitten cried in alarm. A quartet of storm-wings, 2 females, 2 males, had come in low, where no one had seen them, skimming the ground until they reached the base of the curtain wall. Now they sped up its length, ducking the web of fire that was tangling the mages and their mounts, zipping past the archers on the lower levels. Clutching round clay pots in their talons, they were intent on the watchtower and its occupants. Dane recognized the bombs. A spell word from a storm-wing and the pots would explode, showering everyone with liquid fire. Inkblot jumped from the king's belt purse onto the notch of the wall in front of Jonathan, who did not see his danger. The mages were fighting him and the jewel with all they had. Jelly, clinging to Kitten's back, leaped to join the king's darking. Mariel and Taka ignored the blots as they leaned through the crenellated wall. The lady aimed. When her chosen target was only 50 feet away, she loosed. Her arrow took one in the eye. The immortal slammed into the stone with a dying shriek. Jelly and Inkblot dropped to cover the face of the leading storm-wing, blinding him. He thrashed, dropping his bombs in his frantic attempt to scrape the darkings off. They abandoned their victim only when 3 of the archers on the lower wall had riddled him with arrows. The 2 remaining storm-wings came on, deadly rage in their eyes. Taka opened his jaws. His throat gave out an ear-piercing song that was part shriek, with a counterpoint tune in it that sounded like an avalanche. The male storm-wing was half caught by the basilisk's song. His left side turned to stone, his right wing and claw thrashed. He dropped as archers scattered from the wall below. Moments later, the occupants of the tower heard rock shatter on rock. His companion, the female, had come into his rear and side. She escaped Taka's song. Before the half-stone male began to fall, Dane was arrowing down the side of the watchtower. Abruptly she changed shape to that of a larger, heavier golden eagle, and slammed into the female storm-wing's face. Steel teeth snapped. The girl eagle got her claws out of the way just in time. Twisting, she slashed the immortal's throat, then jumped away. Cursing, the storm-wing hit the lower wall, silvery blood spraying everywhere, and from there tumbled end over end to the ground. Dane circled, hunting for the darkings. She was relieved to find them rolling up the watchtower's side, clinging to it as easily as the sunlight did. For the moment the air around the watchtower was clear. Gliding in, Dane carefully picked the 2 inky creatures up in her claws and carried them back up to the king. "Good work," Leaf said from his position on Taka's shoulder. Jelly went to Kitten. Inkblot flowed out of Dane's talons, pouring itself into Jonathan's belt purse once more. The king grinned and stroked the purse. Looking for the Hurrocks and their riders who had run afoul of Jonathan, Dane saw only a heap of white bones on the curtain wall below, and shuddered. A boom from the north shivered the tower stones. Mushrooming billows of arcane light climbed from behind enemy lines. One cloud was sparkling black, the other a deep ruby shade. Numer had found an Arhidensra. Dane shifted from foot to foot, ruffling her feathers and praying as she watched the tendrils of black fire wind through the red, and red through the black. Numer had tricked the Scanran into protecting their contest from the rest of the battle. Let an Arhidensra think it was to keep someone from putting a spear through their backs. Dane knew it was to keep the magical battle from hurting anyone else. Jonathan continued to speak to his queen and generals, passing on the numbers of the enemy and the directions of their movements. His companions defended him from every attack, physical and magical, Kitten and Taka easily handling the latter. Now that Numer had engaged the enemy's chief mage, and Theod's wizards fought most of the rest, few human mages had the attention or strength to strike at those Tortolans who had no gift, and thus no defense. Fresh immortals raced onto the battle-torn ground between their camp in the northeast and Legann. Many bore torn nooses of vines and brambles. They had been forced to rip themselves free of clinging plants roused by the Dominion jewel. On their heels came centaurs, ogres, and knights, all in Tortolan colors, fighting under Tortolan battle flags. When the enemy immortals turned south, to freedom, the ones who escaped the roots that snatched at them from the ground ran into companies of Tortolan soldiers, 2 rider groups, and a small detachment of centaurs who had settled east of Legann. Behind the Tortolans rose a wall of brambles 10 feet high. Anyone who tried to escape the battlefields and camps around the city would run into it. The Dominion jewel, it seemed, could deliver what King Jonathan had promised. Metallic shrieks drew the girl's attention. High above the storm-wings, hurrocks, and winged apes, Barza was locked in deadly battle with another storm-wing, a queen. "Jakul," T'Ka remarked, eyes fixed on the crowned immortals. "Queen of the mortal fear nation." Dane nodded. So this was the dead-voiced female she'd heard in her dream, the one who had said it wasn't important if some of her own kind died. Crimson fires edged with gold tangled around the pair like an ill-made knot. For the most part they clawed at each other. The strange queen was adept at quick swipes of her wing feathers. Soon Barza was laddered with shallow cuts and covered in blood. Her enemy bore wounds as well, belly cuts that bled heavily. Below the queens, Hebek and Rakash fended off any stormwings who tried to interfere. Seeing they were outnumbered, Dane called for the people. Sparrows darted into the fray, dashing around stormwings, pecking and speeding away. Fighting them, or trying to, the immortals smashed into one another, slicing their own allies to pieces. They retreated from Barza's guards, while the rest of her allies came to help with the two males. A net of scarlet fires wrapped itself around Jakul, its ends lodged under Barza's skin. Jakul would have to kill the stone tree queen to escape. With a snarl, Jakul turned and sped at Barza, talons forward, set to impale. At the last second, Rakash's queen detached the webs of her magic and shot upward, Jakul passing under her by inches. Barza fell as Jakul fought to halt and turn. When Jakul stabilized, Barza was behind her, chopping down with the edges of her right wing. Jakul spun hard to meet an attack she expected from her rear or from above. Instead, she jammed her throat and chest into the razor of Barza's wing. Barza seized Jakul's face in one talon, dug in her claws, then let her enemy fall. Jakul's allies, who had watched the duel at a distance from Barza's defenders, wailed. "Dane," Jonathan asked quietly, "would you see how the Yamanis are faring?" She nodded and took off, changing her shape to that of a gull to fly more easily over the ocean. She kept a wary eye out for winged immortals who might try to kill her. As far as she could tell, they were busy enough, caught between city forces and Thayet's army. Everywhere Dane saw the flash of magic, storm-wing crimson edged with gold, brown and gold from centaurs who were also mages, and vari-colored fires that served human wizards. The winged apes laid down a blanket of thick clinging fog, the only magic they possess, but it did little to hide them. Too many winged creatures and too many other mages took part in the fight. The fog would billow, then shred and blow away. Soaring over the harbor, she saw that the enemy's ships were in poor condition. Many of the largest vessels had burned to the waterline, seared by dragon fire. Nearly all those left bore scorch marks. 5 Yamani ships, half of the fleet that had brought Thayet to Legann, kept all but the smallest vessels from making a getaway. Like dogs herding sheep, they were driving those ships still able to maneuver toward the harbor, where they could surrender to Legann's defenders or be crushed against the breakwater. 2 miles past the blockade, Dane found Diamond Flame, Wingstar, and the other 5 Yamani warships. The 10-ship relief force from the Copper Isles, the one she had seen in a Divine Realms vision, was trapped in a circle formed by dragons and Yamanis. 2 enemy ships were burning fast. 3 more were disabled, their masts broken off. Skins of liquid fire flew through the air, hurled by catapults from vessels on both sides. Any that came too near the dragons swerved, burst, and showered their contents on the enemy's ships. Dane was no admiral, but the outcome of this contest was easy to read. Circling, she returned to take on her own shape and report to the king. After hearing her description of the sea battle with satisfaction, Jonathan ordered her to rest. A runner gave her meat and cheese between slices of bread and a cup of heavily sweetened herbal tea. Eating quickly, the girl felt her strength return with every bite and sip. The sun was almost directly overhead when thick, multicolored smoke rose in an unnaturally straight column from the enemy camp in the northeast. Dane viewed it uneasily. It looked far too much like the chaos fence in the Divine Realms. "Sir Raoul, what is that?" Jonathan asked the mirror. "Booby trap," Dane heard the knight reply. "A squad of men found a box in a tent. One was fool enough to open it before we had a mage check it. The god's cursed thing exploded. Killed everyone in the squad, and I don't think it's done making mischief." The column bent and stretched, colors rippling, until it touched one end to the ground where the eastern road and the road that circled Legann met. Anchored there, it condensed until it was nearly 30 feet in height, and solidified until it formed a monstrous 3-headed serpent. Its scales changed constantly, from pale green to pink to yellow, never holding to one color or pattern. Only the eyes in the three heads remained the same, all blood red, with no pupils that Dane could see. The smoke snake turned on the line of Tortollan allies and struck in three directions, each head stretching its long neck for prey, bearing overlong onyx fangs. When the creature straightened again, one head gripped a shrieking man-at-arms in its jaws, the second a green-skinned ogre, the third a female centaur who fought to stab her captor with a javelin that she carried. The serpent devoured them and searched for its next victims. The Tortollan centaurs and ogres fled. One knight turned his war-horse to face the serpent. He was a huge man in brightly polished plate armor. His mount was armored as well, her size well suited to her master's weight. A tight band around Dane's heart squeezed. Raoul of Golden Lake, the knight commander of the King's Own, was not a close friend, but she knew and liked him. She was used to thinking of him as a giant, but the serpent rose at least 10 feet over his head before the body split into 3 necks. Steel wings and claws flashed in the sun. Rakash, his blond hair with its bone decorations streaming behind him, plummeted, talons first, to slam into the monster's central head. The snake roared, its voice tearing at the ears. Silvery fire bloomed on the snake's left head. The badger materialized there, burying claws and fangs into the thing's skull as a small, moving shadow dove into one of the creature's nostrils. Dane gasped. That was Goldstreak! Starlings burst from the trees in a sizable, jeering crowd. Like a swarm of bees, they swirled around the serpent's right head, blinding it, digging sharp beaks into its flesh. Sir Raoul galloped in, massive, double-bladed axe in one hand, hacking at the serpent's body as if he were felling a tree. He struck a vital organ. Blood of no particular color gushed forth to splatter his armor, smoking where it struck. His mount screamed when the drops lashed her rump. Hurriedly the knight guided the mare back from the stream of blood. The snake convulsed. The starlings were not fools. They didn't need a command from Dane to get clear. Pulling back, they left the eye sockets of the head that they had assaulted packed with dead birds. The head that the badger had torn in two lolled uselessly on its neck. He had chewed through bone to its brain, without taking harm from the thing's acid blood. Goldstreak looped itself around the badger's forepaw as the god vanished. The middle head shrilled in rage and pain. It whipped frantically, tossing Rakash into the air. The blonde stormwing slammed into a boulder and slid to the base of the stone. The plate and cup slipped from Dane's numb fingers to shatter on the deck. "Rakash! No!" someone cried in a voice that cracked as it rose. "No! No! No!" It was her voice. If she screamed loud enough, long enough, he would live. She hadn't realized that he meant something to her. She hadn't known he was a friend. It was the three-headed thing's last defiance. It drooped, then dissolved into a liquid soup with colors that shifted over its surface as it soaked into the ground. Queen Barza settled onto the rock that had broken Rakash, shrilling her grief. Hebek landed beside her, keening, eyes ablaze. They had lost the follower who had brought them hope when Osborne held them captive. They had lost the only Stormwing who had tried to set them free. Their voices fell into an odd silence, one of those which came in battles when most fighters stopped briefly to catch a breath. Their eerie wailing sent shivers through everyone who could hear. The battle resumed, but the tide had turned. Everywhere that Dane looked, she saw the enemy fighting to defend themselves, not to attack. Some humans began to lay down their arms. In the north, black fire flared around Crimson still, but the lesser mage fires were dying. In the northeast, so far away that only an eagle, or a girl who had turned her own eyes into those of a raptor, might see, a lone Stormwing took to the air and flapped away. He was trying to escape, leading the others of his kind who fought on. Dane had an idea who it was. "No, you don't," she muttered, blackly furious. "Not this time, and never again. Sire, I request permission to go after that Stormwing." "This is not a good idea," Taka said, placing a gentle paw on her shoulder. "You risk capture or death from others of the enemy. He will be pursued and caught." She faced the basilisk, eyes ablaze. "That's what I said last time, and look!" She swept an arm to include the battlefield before them. A hand rested on her other shoulder. "Then go," the king said, blue eyes direct. "Go, and the gods look after you." "If they are not busy themselves," Taka pointed out. "Chaos must have plenty of strength to draw upon with all this." Dane shed the blanket that she had worn around her human form. Jumping into a wide notch in the stone wall, she leaped out, changing as she did, trading hair for feathers, arms for wings, and legs for talons. As a sparrow hawk, a small, fast bird of prey, she streaked after Osborne.